The North American NA-16 first flew in 1935 and became the foundation of the company's famous trainer family. Around 1,935 examples were built across its early variants. Powered by a 400-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R985 radial engine, it reached about 155 miles per hour with a range of roughly 500 miles. Designed for a student and instructor, the unarmed NA-16 introduced a reliable training platform that eventually evolved into the legendary T-6 Texan. The North American O-47 first flew in 1935 before entering U.S. Army Air Corps service in 1937. A total of 239 aircraft were built for observation duties. Powered by a 975-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine, it reached 221 miles per hour and flew about 840 miles. Its deep glazed fuselage gave the observer an excellent downward view, while light defensive machine guns protected its three-man crew during reconnaissance missions. The North American BT-9 first flew in 1935 and entered service the following year as a basic military trainer. Just 149 aircraft were produced before improved designs replaced it. Powered by a 400-horsepower Wright R975 radial engine, it reached approximately 150 miles per hour with a range of about 500 miles. The unarmed two-seat aircraft served as the direct predecessor to the BC-1 and the famous T-6 training family. The North American XB-21 Dragon made its first flight in 1936 as an experimental medium bomber. Only one prototype was completed after it lost the competition to the Douglas B-18. Powered by two 1,600-horsepower Wright R2600 engines, it reached about 220 miles per hour with a range near 1,960 miles. The six-man bomber carried defensive machine guns and a conventional bomb load typical of its era. The North American BC-1 first flew in 1937 and entered military service in 1938 as an advanced combat trainer. Around 270 examples were produced. Powered by a 600-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 engine, it achieved 205 miles per hour with a range of roughly 750 miles. Unlike earlier trainers, it carried both fixed and flexible machine guns, allowing student pilots to practice aerial gunnery before moving to frontline fighters. The North American Harvard first flew in 1938 and entered Commonwealth service the same year as the export version of the T-6 family. Around 1,463 Harvards were built under this designation. Powered by a 600-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine, it reached 205 miles per hour with a range of about 750 miles. The two-seat trainer prepared thousands of pilots across the British Commonwealth during the Second World War. The North American BT-14 first flew in 1939 and entered service in 1940 as an improved basic trainer. A total of 251 aircraft were produced. Powered by a 450-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R985 radial engine, it reached around 175 miles per hour and had a range of approximately 700 miles. The unarmed two-seat aircraft bridged the gap between the earlier BT-9 and the more advanced T-6 Texan. The North American T-6 Texan first flew in 1938 and entered service between 1938 and 1939. With 15,495 aircraft built, it became one of the most successful military trainers ever produced. Powered by a 600-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 engine, it reached 208 miles per hour and flew about 730 miles. The two-seat trainer prepared generations of military pilots and remained in service with some air forces into the 1990s. The North American SNJ first flew in 1939 and entered U.S. Navy service in 1940 as the naval version of the T-6 Texan. A total of 3,867 examples were built. Powered by a 600-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine, it reached 205 miles per hour with a range of around 750 miles. Used by Navy and Marine Corps pilots, the two-seat trainer supported advanced flight instruction for decades. The North American P-64 first flew in 1939 before entering limited U.S. service in 1941. Only 13 aircraft were built after an export order for Thailand was taken over by the United States. Powered by an 870-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1830 engine, it reached nearly 270 miles per hour with a range of about 650 miles. Originally designed as a fighter, it was mainly used for advanced pilot training. The North American NA-35 first flew in 1940 as an experimental basic trainer, but the project never advanced beyond a single prototype. Powered by a 300 horsepower Lycoming R680 radial engine, it reached a top speed of about 180 miles per hour. Designed with 2 seats for an instructor and student, the unarmed aircraft was evaluated as a low-cost trainer before North American shifted its focus to more capable training designs. The North American NA-64 Yale first flew in 1940 and entered service the same year with French and Commonwealth training programs. Around 230 aircraft were built. Powered by a 400 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R985 radial engine, it reached approximately 170 miles per hour with a range of about 690 miles. The unarmed 2-seat trainer provided an important stepping stone for pilots preparing to fly more advanced military aircraft. The North American A-27 first flew in 1940 and entered limited service in 1941 after an export order for Thailand was taken over by the United States. Only 10 aircraft were completed. Powered by an 870 horsepower Wright R1820 radial engine, it reached 235 miles per hour with a range of around 800 miles. The 2-seat light attack aircraft carried forward-firing machine guns and a modest bomb load for close support missions. The North American B-25 Mitchell first flew in August 1940 and entered service in 1941. With 9,890 aircraft built, it became one of the most successful medium bombers of the Second World War. Powered by 2 1,700 horsepower Wright R2600 engines, it reached 272 miles per hour with a range of about 1,350 miles. Its variants carried heavy machine gun armament, bombs, and even a powerful 75mm cannon in specialized attack versions. The North American P-51 Mustang first flew in October 1940 and entered operational service in 1942. More than 15,000 aircraft were built across all variants. Powered in its most famous versions by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing around 1,490 horsepower, it reached 437 miles per hour with a combat range of approximately 1,650 miles. Armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, it became one of the most effective long-range escort fighters of the Second World War. The North American XB-28 first flew in 1942 as a high-altitude medium bomber prototype. Only 2 aircraft were built before the program was canceled in favor of other bomber designs. Powered by 2 2,000 horsepower Wright R2600 radial engines, it reached an impressive top speed of 372 miles per hour and had a range of about 2,040 miles. It also featured a pressurized cabin, an advanced feature for its time. The North American A-36 Apache first flew in 1942 and entered service later that year as the ground attack version of the Mustang. A total of 500 aircraft were built. Powered by a 1,325 horsepower Allison V1710 engine, it reached 365 miles per hour with a range of about 550 miles. Equipped with dive brakes, 6 machine guns, and underwing bomb racks, it specialized in precision attacks against ground targets. The North American F-82 twin Mustang first flew in 1945 and entered service in 1946 as a long-range escort fighter. A total of 272 aircraft were produced. Powered by 2 1,600 horsepower Allison V1710 engines, it reached a top speed of 465 miles per hour and had a range of approximately 2,240 miles. Its twin fuselage design carried 2 pilots, and the aircraft later became an effective all-weather night fighter during the Korean War. The North American Navion first flew in 1946 as a civilian light aircraft and entered production the same year. North American built about 1,109 examples before production continued under other manufacturers. Powered by a 205 horsepower Continental E185 engine, it reached 163 miles per hour with a range of around 750 miles. Designed for 4 occupants, the versatile aircraft also served in limited military liaison duties as the L-17. The North American FJ-1 Fury first flew in 1946 and entered U.S. Navy service in 1948 as the company's first carrier-based jet fighter. Only 33 aircraft were built before more advanced designs replaced it. Powered by a General Electric J-35 turbojet producing about 3,820 pounds of thrust, it reached 547 miles per hour with a range of roughly 850 miles. It was armed with either 420mm cannons or .50 caliber machine guns. The North American XS-N2J first flew in February 1947 as an advanced naval trainer intended to replace the SNJ Texan. Only 2 prototypes were completed before the program was canceled in 1948. Powered by a 1,100 horsepower Wright R1820 radial engine, it reached about 308 miles per hour with a range of nearly 1,600 miles. Although it never entered production, its design directly influenced the later T-28 Trojan. The North American B-45 Tornado first flew in 1947 and entered service in 1948 as the first operational jet bomber of the U.S. Air Force. A total of 143 aircraft were built, powered by 4 General Electric J-47 turbojet engines, each producing 5,200 pounds of thrust. It reached 570 miles per hour with a range of about 1,910 miles. It served as a bomber, reconnaissance aircraft, and early nuclear delivery platform. The North American F-86 Sabre first flew in October 1947 and entered service in 1949. Nearly 9,860 aircraft were built, including licensed production overseas. Powered by a General Electric J-47 turbojet producing 5,910 pounds of thrust, it reached 687 miles per hour with a range of around 785 miles. Armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, it became the United States' primary fighter during the Korean War and gained fame in battles against the MiG-15. The North American A.J. Savage first flew in 1948 and entered U.S. Navy service in 1949 as its first carrier-based nuclear strike aircraft. A total of 143 examples were produced. It used 2 2,400 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 piston engines, along with a single Allison J33 turbojet for extra speed. Reaching 471 miles per hour with a range of about 1,635 miles, it carried a crew of 3 on strategic missions. The North American T-28 Trojan first flew in 1949 and entered service in 1950 as an advanced military trainer. A total of 1,948 aircraft were built. Early versions used an 800 horsepower Wright R1300 engine, while later variants received a 1,425 horsepower Wright R1820. The aircraft reached about 343 miles per hour with a range of roughly 1,060 miles. Armed versions later served in combat during conflicts including Vietnam and Laos. The North American F-86D Sabre first flew in 1949 and entered service in 1951 as an all-weather interceptor. A total of 2,847 aircraft were built. Powered by an afterburning General Electric J-47 turbojet producing 7,650 pounds of thrust, it reached a top speed of 715 miles per hour with a range of about 769 miles. Instead of machine guns, it carried a retractable tray containing 24 unguided 2.75-inch rockets for interceptor missions. The North American YF-93 first flew in January 1950 as a long-range interceptor prototype. Only 2 aircraft were completed before the project was canceled in favor of the Lockheed F-94. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney J48 turbojet producing 8,750 pounds of thrust, it reached approximately 708 miles per hour with a range of around 1,290 miles. Although it never entered production, it introduced several advanced design improvements over the earlier F-86. The North American FJ-2 Fury first flew in 1951 and entered U.S. Navy and Marine Corps service in 1954. Around 200 aircraft were built as the naval version of the F-86 Sabre. Powered by a General Electric J-47 turbojet producing 7,800 pounds of thrust, it reached 676 miles per hour with a range of about 1,000 miles. Armed with 420mm cannons, it strengthened the Navy's transition into the jet age. The North American XA-2J Super Savage first flew in 1952 as a turboprop-powered successor to the A.J. Savage. Only 1 prototype was completed before the project was canceled because of engine reliability issues and the growing preference for jet-powered aircraft. Powered by 2 Allison T40 turboprop engines producing about 5,332 shaft horsepower each, it reached roughly 449 miles per hour while carrying a crew of 3. The North American F-100 Super Sabre first flew in May 1953 and entered service in 1954 as the first U.S. Air Force fighter capable of sustained supersonic flight in level flight. A total of 2,294 aircraft were built. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney J57 afterburning turbojet producing 16,000 pounds of thrust, it reached 864 miles per hour. Armed with 4 20mm cannons, it also carried bombs, rockets, and missiles during extensive service in the Vietnam War. The North American FJ-3 Fury first flew in 1953 and entered service in 1954 as an improved carrier-based jet fighter. A total of 538 aircraft were built. Powered by a Wright J65 turbojet producing 7,700 pounds of thrust, it reached a top speed of 715 miles per hour with a range of about 1,500 miles. Armed with 4 20mm cannons, it offered better performance and endurance than earlier Fury variants. The North American X-10 first flew in October 1953 as an uncrewed research aircraft supporting the Navajo Intercontinental Cruise Missile Program. A total of 13 test vehicles were built. Powered by 2 Westinghouse XJ40 turbojets, each producing about 10,900 pounds of thrust, it achieved speeds approaching Mach 2 with a range of roughly 530 miles. The aircraft served exclusively as a high-speed aerodynamic and systems test platform. The North American FJ-4 Fury first flew in 1954 and entered service in 1955 as the final and most advanced Fury variant. A total of 374 aircraft were produced. Powered by a Wright J65 turbojet generating 7,700 pounds of thrust, it reached about 680 miles per hour and had a range of approximately 2,020 miles. Armed with 4 20mm cannons, the FJ-4B attack version was also capable of carrying a tactical nuclear weapon. The North American F-107 first flew in September 1956 as a supersonic strike fighter prototype. Only 3 aircraft were completed before the project lost the competition to the Republic F-105 Thunderchief. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney J75 afterburning turbojet producing 24,500 pounds of thrust, it exceeded Mach 2.2 with a range of around 2,000 miles. Its distinctive dorsal air intake made it one of North America's most recognizable experimental designs. The North American T-2 Buckeye first flew in January 1958 and entered U.S. Navy service in 1959 as a carrier-capable jet trainer. A total of 529 aircraft were built. Early versions used a single engine, while later models adopted twin engines for greater safety and performance. The Buckeye reached about 522 miles per hour, with a range of roughly 900 miles, and trained generations of Navy and Marine Corps jet pilots. The North American A-5 Vigilante first flew in August 1958 and entered U.S. Navy service in 1961 as a carrier-based supersonic strike aircraft. A total of 167 were built. Powered by 2 General Electric J79 afterburning turbojets producing 17,000 pounds of thrust each, it exceeded Mach 2.1 with a range of about 3,200 miles. Originally designed for nuclear strike missions, most aircraft were later converted into the RA-5C long-range reconnaissance variant. The North American Sabreliner first flew in September 1958 and entered service in 1959 as both a military utility aircraft and a civilian business jet. More than 800 examples were produced across multiple variants. Powered by twin turbojet engines, it reached approximately 595 miles per hour with a range exceeding 2,000 miles. The aircraft carried 2 pilots and up to 7 passengers, serving for decades in military transport, training, and executive aviation. The North American X-15 first flew in June 1959 as a rocket-powered research aircraft that pushed the limits of speed and altitude. Only 3 were built. Powered by a single-reaction Motors XLR-99 rocket engine producing 57,000 pounds of thrust, it reached Mach 6.7, or about 4,520 miles per hour. Launched from a modified B-52, it set records that remain among the greatest achievements in experimental aviation. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie first flew in September 1964 as a prototype strategic bomber capable of sustained Mach 3 flight. Only 2 aircraft were completed before the bomber program was canceled. Powered by 6 General Electric YJ93 afterburning turbojets, each producing 30,000 pounds of thrust, it had a range of about 4,288 miles. One prototype continued as a high-speed research aircraft, while the other was lost in a 1966 mid-air collision. The North American Rockwell OV-10 Bronco first flew in July 1965 and entered service in 1968 after North American merged into North American Rockwell. A total of 360 aircraft were built, powered by two Garrett T76 turboprop engines producing 715 shaft horsepower each. It reached 281 miles per hour with a range of about 1,428 miles. Armed with 4 machine guns and multiple underwing hardpoints, it served extensively in forward air control and light attack missions during the Vietnam War.